Since you're going to be required to use outside sources in the Explaining Concepts paper, I thought I would prepare a video that explains some of the practices and the principles behind documenting and accounting for your sources. Documentation basically is bookkeeping. It's all about giving credit to your sources and taking credit for your own ideas. Basically, that's all documentation is. As you can see, you document words and ideas that are not your own. This lets you then take credit in sentences that require no documentation for your own words, your own thinking, your own ideas. Any documentation system sets a few basic things. They set the layout of a page. They decide, in our particular case for MLA, that your last name and page number goes in the upper right-hand corner, that your name, my name, the section number, and the date go in the left hand, things like that. They set the margins, they set the typeface. Any documentation system does this. Some documentation systems have different conventions with regard to the use of certain punctuation, certain spellings, and even grammar choices. American Psychological Association, which is a very common documentation form, and which appears in the appendix of our textbook and also in the Easy Writer little handbook, if you bought that with your textbook, doesn't let you use first person, for instance, as a rule. And so that's something that a documentation will set sometimes, is what kind of language you can use. In our particular case, we're going to focus on MLA, or Modern Language Association, which is the discipline standard for those of us who teach English. Basically, there are two elements. The first is what we call an in-text element, and the second is what we call a works cited page. There are, as I mentioned, some other systems. American Psychological Association is very common. The Chicago Manual of Style, or Turabian, uses footnotes. Council of Science Editors, and you can see what chapters these are covered in an Easy Writer book, is what's called citation sequence, where the references list is organized not alphabetically, but in order of appearance of particular citations in the body of the paper. Worldwide, some people estimate between 250 and 500 different documentation systems. The ones that we've listed here are the most common in the United States. Again, modern language has two components, and principles behind that are quite clear. You use the minimum amount of what we call in-text citation in the body of your paper simply to move your readers to the works cited page. That's where the maximum amount of information goes. In the body of the paper, as a rule, you're going to use just the last name of the author or the shortened title, 2 or 3 words, if there is no author, and then you're going to include a page number. If it's a website without a page number, then you need to mention the website author or the website title in the body of the paper, and I'll show you some examples of that later on. You never put a URL, that HTTP thing, in the body of your paper. That only appears on the works cited page. The last thing on this slide to point out is different kinds of sources have slightly different kinds of formats. You'll see examples of these in the Easy Writer book and also in the Writing Center handouts that I've posted to Blackboard to help you with this. This is what a works cited page looks like. It's a special kind of page in your paper. Although you use the same font that you use throughout the paper, you use the same spacing. This is Times New Roman 12 point, which is the MLA standard. Notice that it's what's called a hanging indent for each entry. It's the reverse of a standard paragraph. That's why the first line goes all the way to the margin, and all the other ones are indented. You can do this very easily with the hanging indent feature in Word. It's very difficult to do this in Google Docs. Notice also that this is organized alphabetically by the author, or here in this case, the artist. And that's the way your page should look. Each element is considered a sentence. The author is considered a sentence, the title's a sentence, what we call the publication data is considered a sentence, and then where you found it. Did you find it in a articles database like Academic Search Complete, or did you just take it from an online source, kind of like what we have down here from the Eminem.com website? And this is the way that we do most of our citations. Again, I'll show you how to use websites or how to document websites later in this video. And here they are. First thing when we're looking at a website is we look for the title of the article. Normally that's going to be somewhere below the top, and it's going to be close to the text of the article, as you can see here. So we know the title of this article is "We Have No Idea How Bad Fashion Actually Is for the Environment." I had a student last semester who did a long discussion about sustainability and clothing. It was really interesting, and this is one of the sources the student used. So we have here the title, and we have the name of the author, and we have the date of publication. At the bottom of the page, we're going to find out the name of the publication. So this is an article that was published in an online magazine called Racked. Over here on this side, we see that this is what's called the sponsor. This is the organization that owns this particular online magazine. You need these details if they're available on the website in order to complete a citation. And here's what the citation would look like. Here's the author's name with the last name first and a period. Here's the title of the article, and it's in quotation marks because article titles go in quotation marks. This is the name of the magazine, and that's in italics because names of what are called complete works, books, movies, television shows, video games, website, magazines, print magazines or journals, all go in italics. Next to that is the name of the corporation that sponsors this website, and then the date of publication. And then all this stuff in blue is the URL. MLA says this is optional, but in our course, I would prefer if you use websites to indicate the URL. And that way I can take a look at it and help you document them if I need to. How do we integrate information from a website into a paper? Well, we don't have page numbers, but we do have an author's name. So here's how we would do it. This is a couple of different options. We'd mention the author's name, and then we give what we call his credentials. This is what's called the signal phrase. We mention he's a writer for this magazine, and then we include a short summary or paraphrase or even a quotation of what he said. So here, all I need to identify this and document it properly is the name of the author. Then I can go to the Works Cited page, which I just showed you, and I can say, oh, there's Alden Wicker, here's his article title, and here's the publication data. Another way of doing this to make it even shorter, if I want to, if I don't feel I need to credit the author or it's a second or third reference to the same work, I can put the author's name in parentheses at the end. Again, I don't have a page number because it's a website. Websites, as a rule, do not have page numbers. So we just list the author's last name. Okay, as I've said down here on the bottom. I have to repeat that often because every year I have students who try to add in a page number on a website citation when they really don't have any. Okay. Here's one without an author. This is the name of the article, Professional Development Education for Apparel and Textile Educators, and it is sponsored by a group named Athenas, which is as it says here, a multi-institutional initiative funded by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And it's a consortium of these educational institutions in this government agency. Well, how would we document this? Well, we don't invent stuff that we don't have. We have a title, and we have a sponsoring organization, and we have up here in the top, we have the URL. Okay, so all we need to do is document it like this. Professional Development and Education for Textile Educators. And again, we're taking this as a complete work because this is the only article on this website. We have the sponsor's name and we have the URL. What we don't have is a date, and that's because if you look at this web page, there's no date down here. We don't use the date that I did this screenshot last year, but there's no date on the website itself. So if there's no date, don't make one up. Okay, so this is what it would look like. If we were including this in an essay, we would say, okay, here's Athenas, a research and education consortium, apparel and textile students, reports, and this is a piece from the article, 132 million tons of coal are used annually to meet the needs of the global textile industry. So I can document it by mentioning them in the sentence, or I can document it by just simply mentioning the organization at the end. The idea here is you use what you have. This is enough to move the reader to the works cited page. The reader can then open the URL and find the same source that's being used here. Okay. This sounds really complicated, but it's actually fairly simple. On our Blackboard site, inside the documentation area where you find this video, you're going to see the Writing Center handouts that we've developed that can help you with MLA. And we also have a citation generator there called Noodle Tools. There are other ones out there. Some of you may have used EasyBib or iBiblio or even NightCite. Those are okay. In my experience, however, Noodle Tools is the most accurate. And I've put a link to that on Blackboard. I'll show you how to use that here in a minute. Here are some quick Mike Burke rules. Try not to quote very much. Some of the essays in our textbook, and I've got another video about integrating sources I'll show you after this one, use very long quotations. As a rule, that's not always the best way to do things, although it can be done as long as you follow the rules. What you should be relying on mostly is summary and paraphrase. And the idea here is you're using your own words rather than just simply copying and pasting the words of another author or a source and including them in your paper. The idea is to establish a seamless voice in your paper where you know, whether you're Samantha or Ken or anyone else, that's the voice that's going to be established throughout the paper. That's what people are going to respond to. So that's what you're trying to do. We do have, as I said, an example in the textbook of very long quotations being integrated. I think it works, but the question that you have to ask yourself is, should it work better? Again, I think this is the last slide. It's your paper with your ideas. You should do at least half the talking. The audience needs to know what's yours and what's not yours. If you don't tell them with documentation, with the little in-text citations or the reference in the sentence itself, like I showed you, then the working assumption of the audience is that every word of your paper is yours. And if that's not true, then you're betraying their trust. And if they can't trust you in small things like documentation, they're not going to trust you in big stuff like your ideas. One last point. Can you plagiarize yourself? The simple answer is yes. If you take a paper from a different course, let's say you took English 101 a year ago, or you had a high school course in English where you had to write a paper that might look a lot like an explaining a concept paper. If you bring any part of that paper, whether it's a sentence or whether it's the entire paper in, you've got to document that. You've got to indicate that it's your work, that you've said it in a previous paper, and you indicate that in the body of your paper with a last name and a page number if you have it, if it was a paper. And then you create a works cited page entry for yourself. You list your name, you list the title of the paper, and you list that it was written for a classroom. And there's a format for that inside EasyWriter. If you have questions about that, please let me know. Bottom line is you can plagiarize yourself. Recycling a paper is bad practice. You've already gotten credit for that paper. For this course, you need to do new work. And if you have questions about this, again, please let me know.